I don't think that the work that I'm making, like it's not always trying to be sensational. In fact, oftentimes there's something quite like subtle and small about the production, but it's like the joy of seeing something that's great and made just for you. I love that. Like one of the ongoing personal projects I've done called Young Explorers follows really young kids, like 1, 2 years old, walking through cities on their own. And we do it safely. We do it in a way that artifice is sort of preserved for your joy, but seeing completely unself-conscious people explore worlds on their own is like this moment of a kid possibly being lost, but they express no fear or hesitation. They're just taking in the world and interacting with it. And like that's an example of something it's been really fun for me to develop because it is this like sliver of a moment that we're trying to capture where it's like, well, what if someone wandered off for a moment? What would it look like?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the No Set Path podcast. I'm your host, Drew English. My guest today is Jacob Krupnick. He's a director and the founder of Wild Combination, a fantastic and wonderful filmmaker, and someone who actually goes out and makes personal work and puts it out in the world instead of just talking about wanting to. Jacob and I have been friends and collaborators for years at this point, but our paths actually crossed way before that. The very first job I ever got hired on as an editor, he was one of the directors. I just didn't put that together until like years down the road. We talk about freelance timing, why public therapy might be a healthier model than we actually give it credit for, and what it looks like to keep making things once parenthood makes time anything but unlimited. Trust me, I know. Hit subscribe if you haven't, or leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And now, let's get into it.
Levels are set? This is just automatic?
That's it.
What a pro.
I try.
You've done this a lot.
I've done it before. We finally did it. We're here.
Season 3? Season 4? Are you going to save this for season 6?
It's going to go in the vault, and it'll be the thing I revisit, and I'm like, maybe I should roll it out. No, it's just that bad.
I mean, a real pro knows the value of blackmail. I think we know that's the highest value currency we have.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah. Is blackmail?
Yeah. I mean, that's where the money's at.
Seems appropriate for the day and age we live in.
It is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Good to start on a really dark
starting
note.
on a really high note
I'm
here.
a nice person.
I've been trying to get you to do this for a while. I'm glad this worked out.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
I've been on one podcast before and I was left a little scarred.
What podcast were you? Well, you don't have to mention names.
We're not going to mention the name.
What was the experience?
It was a through the internet podcast with someone in another part of the country.
Yeah.
And I shared, we'll say personal details about where I was at in my life that were not intimate or interesting, but seemed very self-evident that they would be excerpted. And the podcast recording was interrupted several times. And so we had to restart. And so it seemed even more clear that this whole thing would be cut into a more usable and fun to listen to piece. And then this individual just left the whole Megillah in there.
Oh.
And I was mortified. Not that anyone would listen, but it was sort of like me talking about home woes. And it was early COVID, and I was living with my 3 and 5-year-old in a tiny house, and we all thought we were going to, possibly perish in the apocalypse. And it was like, this is not what we're here to talk about.
Well,
so
I'm not going to do you.
Back.
I'm not going to do you dirty. You're back. We talked a little bit about this before you came in, and I was thinking about it because I feel that I've known you a lot longer than I actually have, which is interesting to me. I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, I talk to you kind of regularly. We work together kind of regularly. You're someone who's in my orbit, but I've really only known you since 2020, since COVID.
Right.
And I was thinking about the first time we ever met during COVID lockdown. We were camping out here in Kingston, and you had your house a little ways away in High Falls. And I remember the first night we met, my wife and I came over and sat on your screened-in porch.
It was cold. It was chilly.
It was chilly. It was brisk.
Yeah.
Brisk.
We couldn't invite you inside because
COVID.
We didn't want the apocalypse inside.
Yeah, exactly. And thus blossomed a beautiful personal and professional relationship. So I'm thankful for that. It feels like we've known each other much longer
Agreed.
than we actually have. Although, something I just thought of again now, and we've only discussed once a while ago, is that the very first job I ever worked on in filmmaking, like the job that got me hired away from my part-time work at Apple and got me into the freelance up and down roller coaster that I'm still on today, you were one of 3 directors working on that job, that Intel job.
That was fun. That was an early job for me too, like an early hire. I was part of a 3-person team working on a project for Intel. We went to Ecuador. Another team went to India, and God, where was that third one? Where was the third one?
Kenya.
Mm-hmm. And I was sort of the new guy on the team, spearheading a thing as a young buck director DP. That was super fun. That was a travel project with Soren Nielsen, who's now been DP on, I don't know, 10 or 15 personal things, non-personal things, and an experience of being thrown out into the wild and working somewhere remote and figuring a lot of things out and managing strange personalities along the way, because we were traveling with a celebrity. It was kind of before the word influencer was
it was
thing.
pre the term influencer. It was predated that term being coined, but that's pretty much what it was.
Yeah. So we had an influencer who's lovely and a young high schooler who's impressionable, and then a lot of young people around Ecuador to film and work with. And
then shenanigans ensued.
They did. There were shenanigans high in the mountains in the Chimborazo province.
I just always find that like a really interesting sort of like full circle moment where I really kind of had no idea you were tied up in that job. We had never met, and you were never on camera. And then all these years later, it's like, oh, interesting. Like you were there at the beginning of my career in filmmaking, and you never even knew it.
The fairy godfather type.
It's funny, I still call you that.
Oh, no, I do love that when there are ways that you sense like your path being accidentally braided in with other people's. And sometimes that's about a thing that you work on together, but a lot of the time it's also about a place you live or a place you've been. I grew up in New York. I moved to New York with my mom when I was 10, and my older brother, who's a huge influence and impression on me, was already living in Manhattan. And since I still live in New York, then, after 30 years of all of these different lives there, I think a lot about how overlapping experiences in different places, as the city changes, as people change, that's a kind of framework I have for all kinds of projects and places. And this is an example of that. Right, you cross paths before you know, and then when you realize, then there's an interesting kind of recognition of like, all right, we share something here about our wandering trajectory.
Yeah.
I touched the mic.
It's okay.
Touch the mic.
It's okay. It'll be seen on camera. So at least everybody will know the mistake that you made. They'll be able to see it and ridicule you for it.
5 points lost.
Demerits. I think about this a lot, especially lately, because by default, I'm a very impatient person. I think my default mode is to be like impatient, and I'm always in a hurry to get somewhere. But oftentimes I'll catch myself saying, well, where am I in a hurry to get to? And so I say it because if we think about, like you said, the path is winding and things come back in weird, kind of unpredictable ways, oftentimes many years down the line. It's like I've found, and I think this is true just for being on your own, self-employed, freelancing. It doesn't have to be just film and video. It could be like whatever. If you're out there just kind of hanging in the breeze by yourself and you're dictating, your own life and your own ambition and whatever, I feel like there is a certain level of patience or acceptance. Patience isn't the right word. It's like you have to get used to the acceptance factor of things happen on weird time horizons, often really slow. There's big voids of nothing. And then lots can happen all at once in very condensed time frames. And that's been really hard for me to get comfy with. I still struggle with that.
I think though that like I think in your writing and to some extent the podcast, like I see you trying to wrestle with that pretty directly. And because a lot of the things that you share are like, because we have a conversation outside of this and it's not just this parasympathetic relationship where I listen to you and consume your messaging, but because I know you and have conversations, then I know that the writing you're doing is frequently trying to find an antidote to an inner anxiety, and that by writing these things, I'm often thinking to myself like, Drew's working through that thing that he has said he is feeling nagged by.
For sure.
And that's like, in that way, I commend you for going through with it, because even by writing, there is to some extent, your thoughts become your actions bit by bit.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think oddly, as someone who's like kind of uncomfortable in a lot of different ways, for some reason, I've made peace with the fact that instead of keeping all that to myself and like writing a private journal or whatever, I've decided to kind of like air some of this publicly in a newsletter or what have you, in ways that people can take in. And I've always kind of been, I shouldn't say always, I think since I started really getting involved in doing this podcast and working more in that space in general, I've gotten a lot more accustomed to putting more of myself out there, not for a self-serving aspect, but because, well, if I'm going through something, then there's probably other people out there who are going through something too. And it's kind of like a nice natural way to work through some stuff, maybe help some other people, and also help build the overall awareness for what I do and whatever it is I'm trying to build on my own. So it feels very like, it feels like there's a good relation there.
Public therapy.
Therapy
for, it's like the public fountain where, in small towns in France and Italy where everyone gets the spring water.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm doing the therapy.
Yeah.
You can have a little taste for free.
Well, and one of the reasons I really wanted to get you in the chair for this show is because I always think of you as a very, and I don't want this to go to your head, but I think of you as like probably one of the most, if not the most like calculated and considered people I know in how you handle yourself and how you present yourself and how you kind of move through, we've had friend conversations where, you have two young kids, like there's madness that happens just like with everyone else,
Yeah.
that notwithstanding, it's like, especially professionally, you do something naturally that I've had to like really train myself to do, which is I think you have a natural level of foresight built in.
Whoa.
And so yesterday I had a guest in here where we talked about foresight, and I mentioned like, I wish I had better foresight when I was younger. And I do. But I think, and maybe you don't do this actively, but I think you look at all the chess pieces and you try to consider all the different angles in whatever it is you're doing. So we work frequently in a director-cinematographer relationship, and you're very good at laying all the pieces for a job out on the board and thinking about how they're all going to fit together. And I don't think I've ever seen you lose your cool, ever, even though I'm fairly certain you probably have and may have like burst a blood vessel somewhere in your head. Yeah. I've never seen that outwardly reflected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always fascinating to be read by someone, because you're like, I mean, first of all, thank you. And it's humbling. And it's also in some ways a bit, I feel a little blind to some of it because we're all in our heads a lot.
Well, as you should be. I mean, there's no reason you should be assessing yourself on that level.
But I don't also feel like, I think of myself as observant, but not, I don't know. I often look at all kinds of people, peers, non-peers, just people making things, and feel like if there's something I envy, it's in watching how people of different skill sets are kind of methodically building a path a little bit further in advance than I am. I think I work like my work and my progress and career growth has been like relatively slow with moments of real punctuation, but on the inside of the organ, it feels more characterized by uncertainty and hope and ambition, but also uncertain resources and always trying to do the best with what I have, and sometimes that being like not enough knowledge or not enough time or not enough of a resource that feels easy to blame things on, right? And yet, because I've worn like my background in film is someone who started by wearing all of the hats, and then as my work grew in complexity and client demands grew, like more and more and more hats, and some of them, it became pretty clear like that's a hat I can wear really well. This is something that I really enjoy, but may not need to specialize in, and so on. So I feel like because I'm often producing shoots, or I'm often at least like laying all of the groundwork for the ideas behind a project, then I have to know how things are going to work relatively well before I bring other people on, because I'm often spending weeks or months getting stuff to the point where I can actually hire people. And that means that as a sort of sign of affection and a courtesy, which is a really wimpy word, but like I find it like a real sign of respect to take the time from my point of view and organize the things that other people need to know in a way that is clear enough and free of randomness. And even though I'm not the world's most effective producer for sure, I can anticipate what people need to know. And I feel like we all have that experience. If you work in production, you're constantly being asked to come up with ideas for which you need more information, and it should be predictable what that information is, and it has been withheld from you, or it has been, there's been a failure to communicate. And so anytime that it does exist, I love being like, and here's what you need to know. And anytime it doesn't exist, I love to be forthcoming about that and acknowledge, I know you need to know something, and we cannot at this moment tell you what is behind that door. But we're thinking of you, set decorator. We're thinking of you, cinematographer. Anyway, that was a little bit of a meander. I'm, work-wise, my background is in still photography. After college, I was interested in being a photographer full-time.
Yeah, and you were assisting for a while, right?
Yeah, I studied sociology and creative writing, economics, a very liberal arts version. And loved it, and was always really interested in anthropology, sociology, and I've always felt in some ways more comfortable and more engaged in places where I'm a little bit of a foreigner, that I'm not like everyone else. My interest in photography started pretty early. In middle school, I was the kid who learned how to print photos in the darkroom, and then figured out how to get a key to the darkroom, and then figured out how to get miniature commissions and would give myself assignments to make little photo books. And then by looking at more photographers' work and thinking about how to go about things and what interested me, like that sense of maybe being a photographer or kind of art-based photojournalist was there pretty early. There wasn't a good photo program at the college I went to, kind of surprisingly. And I just kept going with it in the summers and thinking about, like, I think when I leave, maybe that's what I'll try to do. So when I graduated, it took me a year of working in restaurants to kind of get that in and out of my system, and then figure out how to find enough reliable work. And I knew someone who was a wedding photographer who lived in my brother's apartment building. My brother helped set me up with that and assisted one weekend for a wedding. And when he asked me afterward, like, I've got another one next weekend, are you down to join? Then I was like, this is the moment to leave the restaurant. Because for that year, I'd had this running excuse of like, I have to keep working to make a living, but I'm always booked and therefore can never take photo jobs. So as soon as I had the second gig, then I was like, goodbye, this gig work. Let's pick up that gig work. And then over the course of like 7-8 years, my assisting was mixed between, I had this swath of people who were shooting really high-end events, like super expensive weddings and bar mitzvahs and birthdays and stuff, mostly in New York, but sometimes they'd be travel and we'd, go somewhere else in the country or the world and do something like kind of like ambitious team of 5, go photograph a crazy $1 million wedding, whatever. And then I assisted a bunch of art photographers, or we'll say 3 or 4 artists whose work I really admired. And those were informative in a completely different way. Out of those relationships, I got to see people who always are working with like one person at a time, as in one assistant. And so we'd have these intimate experiences with change makers or famous people, and I would just see the way that they conducted themselves around other people. And that was hugely informative. And then I worked with a couple artists who also just seeing the way that they would spend time thinking about, what is interesting about work in the first place. And then getting a sense of like what it means to be someone who's taking on projects that are self-driven, that aren't really commissioned other than by you. And I found that incredibly attractive and appealing, while also I found it really tough for myself to have enough focus and mojo to go pursue my own photography projects in an ongoing way. I had like one project I was shooting every year.
Yeah.
That was an interesting thing for me, but I wasn't quite sure what to do with the pictures.
Yeah.
And somehow when I started exploring film, then it made a lot more sense to me that, what you're doing here is you are finding an audience in an ideal world. And that audience tends to be more vocal and more enthusiastic than the audience for photography.
So that was going to be my follow-up is, how did you find filmmaking in motion? Like, how did you make that discovery, being so rooted in photography and, writing a lot of different lines just in that world can be very large and deep. How did you find filmmaking? Like what was that transition?
I think, there's no disconnecting an interest in film from like the time that you grow up in, and what you're seeing a lot of invariably seeps into your set of references and source of joy. I often say that I think I'm like a child of MTV. I feel like the great MTV era of the late 80s to mid 90s, before it was a kind of popularity machine, just fed me so many different versions of world building. And MTV is the first channel that you tune to just to see what's up, because something that's on it is going to be interesting. It's not like I'm tuning into Fox to watch The Simpsons in 1990. It's like I'm going to MTV because whatever's going to be there is going to be some little world building. And that was really
school special, man.
Yeah. And I found that totally exciting, as a lot of people do and did. And like jumping decades into the future, I had started experimenting with moving images a little bit, and had a couple funky multi-projector installation jobs that I had taken on for no money, just to figure out how to edit and figure out how to make something that was interesting, that was going to be installed in an art context. But it's really when the Canon 5D and 7D start doing video, making video, then I had the camera and I had the lenses, and I started tinkering, and that acceleration of ease in playing around, especially for someone who didn't have a film school background at all, suddenly meant a pretty swift learning curve was possible if you're interested.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think that's a common tale for a lot of people in our generation of filmmakers, because you're a few years ahead of me in terms of involvement in the industry. But, for me, it was very similar. The whole reason I got that job that I was an editor on was because I had access to gear, like easy access to gear that was accessible, was affordable. I bought a used camera and taught myself to shoot and edit. And you could go down the rabbit hole and explore and experiment, and because access was easy. So that's interesting. It's interesting how you made that shift, but it makes a lot of sense. And so many people in our kind of our generational cohort, if you want to call it that, of filmmakers who started on DSLRs and things like that have gone on to, the Daniels did the same thing, and they just won an Oscar not too long ago. So it's pretty wild to see when access and availability kind of breaks down where everybody, quote unquote, everybody can, kind of sink their teeth into something, what's possible. And, one of the reasons, well, before I ask this, because we've like done a lot of background, we've expounded on that a lot, but one thing I struggle with is like, what do I categorize myself as? Like, what do I do? I do a lot of different things, as you do as well. But like, what would you call yourself?
I call myself a director now, and I'm I'm a couple years into using that without feeling like a complete schmuck. And I'd say even 3 or 4 years ago, I might use more words. Or I might say, I often say I'm a filmmaker. I think in a way it's more honest for me personally to use the phrase filmmaker, because there's so many things that are part of the creative process that are not only are they not like what people assume directing might be, but they're not even necessarily what the act of directing is. There's research. There's like being a shitty accountant for my small business. There's outreach of different sorts to new people, whether they're potential collaborators or performers or insurance providers. And none of that feels exactly like, hey, I'm directing today, right? It's like, but somehow by saying filmmaking, I'm a strong believer in the Tao of Werner Herzog. And I think part of his credo is really like, filmmaking is made in the thighs. It is schlepping. It is caring for people. It is sneaking into places that you're not supposed to go. It is being patient when it serves the process. It's accepting constant defeat and demoralization. And I don't have the thickest skin in the world, but I'm very heartened and nourished by by those reminders that aren't just the reminders of like feel-good internet culture of the last 5 or 10 years, but someone who's been making films for 60 years and basically saying like, sometimes you should do it when you don't have what you need. You've gotta do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was curious how you would self-categorize.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I were to, not that this happens all the time, but if somebody were to ask me what you do, I would say director. If it were in the context of like just work and whatever, I'd say director. But if I think about it, I think you do embody more of like the umbrella of filmmaker, because you wear a lot of different hats.
Umbrella boy.
Yeah. And because
Hat man.
Yeah, well, you do all the jobs. I mean, we've worked on stuff. I mean, we worked on that Serrata piece where for the most part, it was just you and I, and sometimes just you going and getting work done because you wanted to see the project through. And so I'm always curious how people self-categorize themselves, because I'll tell people sometimes, only because it's easier, I'll be like, oh, I'm a filmmaker. Yeah. Because if I have to get into the nitty gritty of like, well,
and also
this, and
but if I have to,
but I think of all the people I know, and I've met and know tons of people in this industry specifically, I think you're one of the few that really like kind of embody the overarching umbrella of filmmaker, because I've seen you wear all the hats at multiple times.
Some of it's out of love, a lot of it's out of necessity.
Sure, yeah.
And some of it, I think I am habituated to doing things that, my God, it would be nice not to, but I don't even think about who else is going to do this for me.
Yeah.
My older brother is a commercial director.
Okay.
And he's been
Wait, I didn't know that.
Surprise. Tobias Burse.
Huh.
Tobias Burse, director. And like absolutely the biggest influence for me as a person. Not so much in filmmaking styles because our work's quite different, but he has been a massive influence for me forever. And like he got his start as a writer. He wrote for Rolling Stone and then for Pop-Up Video.
Oh, Pop-Up Video. Yes.
Pop-Up Video. And then gradually started making his way into filmmaking. And his process, he's a phenomenal writer. He's the sharpest and wittiest person with the word that I know, and has an extraordinary memory and set of reference points. And the way that plays into the kind of work he makes is fascinating to see. And my brother does not really produce. He definitely doesn't operate a camera. He is a director, period. And it's always funny when we talk about what we're doing because his work and his nature, it's like he just has this entirely different way of thinking about the work. And now that I'm working on a level that's not where his is commercially, but where we both touch, sets and crew and production and lenses, whatever, then it's really fun talking about like where his boundary of interest and my boundary are really different. And I think we're, in a nice way, not a competitive way, we're both sort of envious of the other one's domain a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I carry 35 bags and he also needs a different kind of help to get anything made.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I've known you this long. I didn't know your older brother was a director. Funny. It's funny how that works. The other thing I was thinking kind of just now.
Did you just check your watch? Am I boring?
What?
No, I'm just kidding. I know you're a watchman.
I am a watchman. I'm also just always trying to be considerate of other people's time.
I was wondering if there might be also a watch, like a watch sponsor in the, like here we are with my.
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
Now you've distracted me from my question.
Perfect.
So
more edits,
more
cutting.
editing, more cutting. You more so than anybody else I've worked with are so good at consistently digging in and putting out passion work, personal projects, whatever you want to call it. And there's definitely it's clear there is a high level of importance for that in your existence as a filmmaker, right? And a lot of your work focuses on movement and dance. You've put out work that's happened in incredible spaces. You had the rooftop film on the New York Times building that you shot years ago that just came out not too long ago.
5 years of waiting on that
5 years of waiting. You've done, Then Comes the Body, which was your documentary short that you shot with our friend Soren in, remind me the country?
Nigeria.
In Nigeria. Was in the running or was it shortlisted for an Oscar?
It had qualified for
It had qualified for an Oscar.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to be in that space is pretty incredible. You're very well aware that the more of yourself you put out into the world, the more opportunity can come your way. And I'm not saying that's the motivation, but I think that's in your awareness. But it's very clear to me that it's like, oh, there's an expression that you need to have, and you're doing that through personal projects, through passion work. We just not too long ago released the short film on Serrata cycles, which was clearly something you were passionate about telling. Talk to me about the importance of that. Like, what does that do for you? And what's the continued drive like? Because since I started in filmmaking, everybody's always said, you have to make personal work. You have to make personal work. I've made some. I haven't made as much as I should have.
Yeah.
I feel that burn often, but life gets in the way and maybe I shoot myself in the foot. But you have figured out a way to navigate still outputting things. So I'm curious what that means for you.
I think in some ways, it's funny, if you're going to ask about where does any impulse come from, right? Like what fuels it or what keeps you from putting out more? I think almost inevitably, there's an unanswerable side of that of what is it? So it's funny to think about how to even verbalize, like, where does a want come from? Um, I'd say I think that a lot of the personal work that I make is quite joyful and is interested in inviting people who are watching to experience some sense of unexpected joy or something a little bit transcendent. And that's a word I use while also rolling my own eyes. But the experience I like the most as a person out in the world is great immersive theater or great live music events that take me over. That's the highest form of feeling satisfied, whether it's explicitly joyful or whether it's something else, than to have your attention fully commanded by something. That's the greatest. And that happens in a great afternoon or a great moment of playing with the kids. It happens at a concert or a dance performance for me. It happens in certain slivers of life that are so brief in the greater scheme of things, which is, mundane and filled with dishes and filled with headaches and schlepping and attempts to find your way. And I'm interested in making work that fills that space for other people where there is a tiny moment, a brief moment where you go, I'm really excited by the way this person I'm watching has chosen to live their life, or I'm really delighted by watching this person move through the world in the way that they do. I don't think I've really articulated that in quite that way or realized that exactly before. But I don't think that the work that I'm making, like it's not always trying to be sensational, but in fact, oftentimes there's something quite like subtle and small about the production, but it's like the joy of seeing something that's great and made just for you. I love that. Like one of the ongoing personal projects I've done called Young Explorers follows really young kids, like 1-2 years old, walking through cities on their own. And we do it safely. We do it in a way that artifice is sort of preserved for your joy, but seeing completely unself-conscious people explore worlds on their own is like this moment of a kid possibly being lost, but they express no fear or hesitation. They're just taking in the world and interacting with it. And like that's an example of something it's been really fun for me to develop because it is this like sliver of a moment that we're trying to capture where it's like, well, what if someone wandered off for a moment? What would it look like? Okay, so to bring it back to what you asked about, like, what is it like to make, what do I think making personal work's about, or why do I do it? I mean, on some level, these are all expressions of ideas that are bubbling enough in my head that they take up real estate and they don't go away. And then eventually I get impatient with the rest of my creative life and work life. And I'm thinking like, I have to do something for me. That's almost always behind me actually going to make a personal thing. It's like the work I'm getting is not feeding the soul quite enough.
So
right?
it's trying to clear some stagnant energy.
Yeah. Or it's just the desire to do something that's simply different from what I might be doing in the rest of my work. But then I think on some level too, there's, it's not so well calculated. It's not as well calculated as I wish, but part of me making personal work is also just trying to constantly put things out into the world that I would love people to hire me to make. And in spite of having made a fair amount of projects at this point that do for me, like clear my bar of saying like, that's a good one. I'm genuinely excited by this project and how it turned out. And those are the projects for which like any of my air quotes notoriety has been built on.
Yeah, sure.
And yet that has not been the work that I have tended to be hired for. I tend to be hired for making things that are storytelling for people who are interested in a great story and need help and know that when they work with me, they get a lot of attention and a lot of care. And so I'm always trying to bend. I mean, I think part of making the work that I do and putting it out comes from being like, I really want to make work that uses movement and dance as the storytelling mechanism, just like I did over here and over here and over here and over here. And when I do get those calls, it's like, meal steals, thank God, like we're finally seeing a parallel. I think this is common for filmmakers, but it's, something I envy in other directors' work is when it's clear that they're being hired for something that resembles their speciality or their personal interest. And some part of me is always like, how on earth are there not more people asking me to do this thing that I clearly have a vested interest in? Not a mastery in, just a major interest, and that does get some attention. But it will happen, and it is a long game, and it is happening, and it is slow. And part of what's strange about our business is that we don't choose the work that comes to us. We try to shape what it is as best we can.
Yeah, I mean, do you have? Maybe this is the wrong way to ask this question, but do you have like an end game in mind in terms of where you want that intersection of like personal creativity and
I don't think
commerce work to
there's no end game. I think anyone who thinks that there's like a destination is not yet. It's not that they're wrong. It's that they haven't realized yet that there isn't an end game for anything.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think that in general, you want to be, this is sort of internet, a little bit of cribbed internet wisdom, but you want to be playing games in your life for which winning looks like you get to keep playing.
Yeah.
You want to be in an arena that you're happy to be in, as opposed to I can't wait to retire. I'm not evangelizing hustle, but I love the idea that as my life changes, as my availability as a dad changes my life, that it's not, work is not a place that I go.
Right.
Work is sort of a thing that I'm doing. And I oftentimes wish I had more time that looked like this or like this or like this. But on the whole, even if work is always, it's a huge thing to grapple with, but I like what I do, even when the actual part of what I might be doing is not always.
I've stated this publicly before, probably in my writing, but to enjoy the journey. This is the part of the interview where I call back to my earlier statement of I should take my own advice.
Yeah.
And
you should.
I constantly dish out the whole enjoy the journey because that's all there is, kind of, there is no destination. There's only a journey kind of ethos.
Yeah.
But then in personal practice, that gets really difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Really difficult to process because you're constantly striving for the next thing and the next thing. But really it should be about enjoying that journey. And there's definitely, I kind of call a little bit of bullshit on the phrase, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I call bullshit on that because I've worked on things that I love and there's parts of it that still suck,
yeah, that's a false, it's a false, that's a thing to be knitted into a pillow. And then,
but I do agree that there can be a happy medium with weaving in, I don't want to call it work-life balance. It's not so much that, but it's kind of where everything just becomes one quilted together piece,
It also means you have to be okay with the fact that a lot of work, the work that goes into making things it's like supremely unglamorous. And that's a thing that bugs people to different degrees.
Yeah.
And, your threshold for doing stuff that kind of sucks has a lot to do with how much you get done. Can I go back a few minutes?
You can do whatever you want.
In a thought process.
You are the guest. You can do whatever you want.
I'm going to make it about me for a minute. I tend to be more passive than I wish in stating my goals. Like you asked about the end game, and I know you weren't trying to lead me down the path of
No.
of where I went, but I maybe answered in a way that was a bit of a platitude. I actually have a really clear sense of what success looks like in a couple years and a few years and a few years after that. And the individual blocks of work and output can vary a ton, but I am dying to make a second feature film, and that's been in development in fits and starts forever.
Yeah.
And is now getting serious attention from me. And some of that means reckoning with why it has taken me so long. I have a handful of shorter projects that are personal ones that are important for me to make that I'm trying to figure out, can I do those, or should I drop them in favor of helping the feature come to life no matter what? I have been pretty uncomfortable until the last few years in owning dance and movement storytelling as part of my calling card, like front and center, or we'll say the biggest part of my calling card. I've always resisted pigeonholing. I've always felt really uncomfortable defining what I do. And it's only recently as a, now 42-year-old person where I'm like, it's dopey for me to feel frightened of being pigeonholed, because in fact, it's a lot easier for people to get behind ideas and stories and people when they have a better understanding of what's going to come out of working with that person.
Yep.
And so I have tried to figure out the self-narrative that, starts to become true internally, but feels false at first, which goes something like, I'm a person who discovered dance pretty late in life. I felt extraordinarily uncomfortable with my own body. And yeah, I've always been sort of interested in discomfort, like emotional discomfort. I wouldn't say I deal with it super well, but I look for ways to kind of run into that light a little bit. And, it started with making a feature-length dance film 15 years ago. And working with dancers over time has become a very steady and interesting practice for me. And I'm interested in working on projects where that practice gets developed more and more and more. And sometimes that means working with professional dancers. And a lot of the time it means working with people who aren't quite, and trying to tell stories that are interesting with movement that aren't about just being a great dancer. Like there's now, something that's changed a lot since I started working in dances. There's so much on the internet. There's so much on social. And there's clearly just you bump into dance in so many places that you didn't used to. So what made me feel pretty insecure for, 10, 12, 13 years that I'm sort of getting over is the idea that I have no professional background here. I don't come from a place of having, been a dancer or knowing terminology or being good with choreography or having any kind of background understanding of how dance has come to be what it is. But I do see a lot of performances now. I do dance a fair amount now as a layman. And I think being an outsider is helpful in all kinds of ways, because it keeps you fresh in a way that is actually distinct from, say, the 10 dance filmmakers whose work I'm always peeking at. And I'm like, Jesus, they're so good. But they're all people who come from a dance background. And there is something about the work that I want to make that's actually just materially different and less interested in polish and more interested in a story that other people who are not professional dancers can enjoy and digest and follow.
I sat down here wanting to talk with you about making personal work and the why. And mostly because, like I said, you're one of the few people I know who does output personal work consistently. And I've been so curious about the motivator behind it. And it's I'm kind of teasing out a little theme as we're sitting here. And yes, personal work is about self-exploration, but also you're also doing a really great job, in my opinion, of identifying things that either make you uncomfortable or slightly uneasy, and you're not sure how to process that internally. So you're finding a way to externally process that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair and interesting breakdown. There's so many things to be uncomfortable about.
So many.
Yeah.
And there will always be more.
Yeah.
But what I find really interesting and helpful, I think, to just put out into the world for people to listen to is that as artists and creative people, we're always going to be in our own head constantly. It's how do you kind of deal with that and navigate those ups and downs. And for you, the navigation it's pretty clear. You're like, oh, I'm just going to try to make work about this thing that I don't fully understand, that I'm uncomfortable with. But to your credit, you kind of just run at it as full speed as you can to do that self-exploration. And at the end of it, you have this thing that you can then put out into the world. And if you've had that kind of aha epiphany moment, or even on a smaller scale, just made some sort of realization or gotten some joy out of that project, then you're kind of passing that joy down the line to other people to like kind of continue that momentum in perpetuity,
I like that reading because the work that I make is, like I said, I think that the joy that a lot of the personal work is trying to create is not reflective of my just everyday normal demeanor. I'm a critical person who's got a hefty share of grumpiness and a huge amount of criticism of how the world functions. And yet, like that is embedded in the curiosity of the work for me, but it's usually not superficially present in the work. The work is not typically grumpy ass Jacob thoughts.
No, it's not.
Which typically maybe Phil Jacob thoughts.
It's not. It's like there's two things. It's like it's what we just talked about, where it's like the self-exploration and processing that externally, but it also, like, there's some part of me that harkens back to, you get so much out of these immersive experiences that speak to you, whether it's theater or music, and being in those spaces and trying to recreate that feeling that you have. I think I think maybe a better way to say it is like, there's a self-exploration part, but there's also the side that, like, you're trying to hang on to that euphoric thread of like, I want to feel this all the time. And the best way for me to feel that all the time, and a much more healthy way, is to express yourself creatively, try to get back to that place, and then share that feeling with other people. And hopefully other people experience the same thing. And I think it keeps that kind of gear turning for you in a way.
That's a great reading. I mean, I don't, it'll be funny for me because I don't talk about making things through this prism, really. It'll be funny for me to think about that in the coming months, because making things is a kind of weird slog, and it does, as much as I wish it was like retreat to the cabin and hole up and celebrate your successes with red wine and bike rides, then it's a little bit more like the day gets carved up in 1,000 ways. And I think it's helpful, for me at least, it's helpful to have some kind of wayfinding system for like, what am I focusing on, or what's driving this direction, or these thoughts in the first place. And sometimes it's really helpful just to have like almost like a recipe or a little compass, and externalizing this actually, it's a little bit like life scripting, life pre-production or something. I'm not putting that well, but I won't think about this.
I get it.
It's my free therapy hour.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming.
No charge.
Perfect.
Kind of the other thing to explore as we start to like maybe wind this down a little bit is, I think about my position in life right now, where I found I started as a musician. I have a background in music. I did a lot of that when I was younger. I didn't really find creative expression through visuals until later in life. And, now we're both of similar age. We both have kids, family responsibilities, like all this stuff. That is wonderful and amazing, but it constricts what you're able to do creatively, how much time you're able to invest in things, and all that is a given. Like, I don't need to unpack that. But I'm curious how in an industry and in a creative space that really touts youth as like an advantage. I'll say it because I can't think of the proper word. How does, being a middle-aged guy with a wife and kids and living and having like a healthy amount of like quote unquote normal life.
Yeah.
Like, how does that inform what you do, what you take on, how you process the world? Like, I can talk about it. And for me, it's been positive and very aligning and at the same time difficult and maddening and lots of things. But as I said at the beginning, you're a calculated and considered person. So I don't doubt that you've thought about this.
Yeah.
On early mornings or late nights.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to like express the challenges of like the situation you're in your life, which is, age and responsibility. It's your money in the bank and security and what you have to do to keep things going. All the thing, like you're where you're at in your life, where you're at geographically, who like all these things influence what you can potentially have access to in film. It's a completely unfair, like it's a universe of unfair advantages, right? And if you have more time, or if you have more money, or if you have more security, or if you have more trust of the masses, right? If you're the 19-year-old ingenue, then you like it's the most uneven playing field.
Yeah.
I think that how do you balance it is an absolute motherfucker of a question. And it's been, for me, like the way that I oscillate between work and parenting is a thing that is a constant challenge. My wife and I balance things in a way that's sometimes glorious, sometimes really frustrating. I think it's probably pretty frustrating I know it is frustrating for her to have someone for whom their work is inherently, flapping about. To bring it back, like, how do I think about, it's not even work-life balance. It's like, how do I think about how to balance the things that I want to do and that I want to make with the situation I'm in and not resort to just platitudes? You can have a lot of different things in your life, but not at the same time. I don't have nearly as consistent of a health practice or cycling practice or personal work practice as I wish, because since commission work comes when it does, and it's been a very rocky, funky several years, then the answer to most commission requests is like, let's talk about it. Probably yes, which means it's hard to everything else gets reprioritized around it. I think one genuine silver lining is that without a lot of time, I can't pursue things that I'm not pretty excited about if they're personal projects. Like it's just the litmus test. It has to be the main thing that I want to do on the personal front, or else there's just not enough time. For my close friends who are in roles that are similar to mine, who are directors trying to make features, or who are trying to take a big step up in their career path, I'm hugely envious in a certain way of the people without kids. They have an entirely different horizon for their time, for their day, for their evenings. Before kids, it was very normal for me to have, the rhythm of, if I'm excited about it, I will stay up incredibly late working on this thing. I will edit until I am a bit zombied, and I'll get up and feel whatever I feel and keep going. And I tend to be an impatient maker who, when I'm excited by something, I want to run as fast as I can toward it. At this moment, I can't run all that fast toward anything. So the personal projects tend to, they take up some spot in my brain. And then when they've been bubbling for long enough, then usually it's the one that just won't go away, that I'm like, I've got to answer that call. Like that's clearly the one, because it's been through the process of natural selection, and it's momentarily killed out the other ideas, and it's now the apex predator of personal project ideas. But, I think it's inevitable for me to think, with more success comes more money and more ability to choose things. And that's not really, I don't think that's actually how, that's fantasy. Like, that's a fantasy narrative. But to me, like, what more success means is basically having a little more confidence in myself to pick and choose what makes sense. And also the confidence of the other people who help enable film projects to say, yeah, that's like what you should be doing is the thing that you have proposed, because that sounds like we can see that working in your personal work. Do that dance ad. Or, you want to make a dance film that's going to be 80 minutes told through movement and international travel and this soundtrack and this storyline. Cool. We can see that works because you have done that before. And so when it comes time for me to raise the money for it, maybe that's not as exotic of an ask. How do you balance your time? It's like, as a parent, at the same time, if I can, the counterbalance to feeling like there's never enough of it, then the last several years have also been so wildly, I think, like the emotional torpor of life since COVID is really different for people in different circumstances.
Agreed.
But it also feels, as much as I love making things and love making films, I also think for people in their early and mid 30s who are like having what on Instagram looks to be like absolute, blast, I'm like, man, you will never have the feelings that you get through a banal day hanging out with your weirdo kid, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, as the best day on set. Like being with, like the creation of a new family unit and then seeing your kids evolve is this absolutely transformative thing that, I want other people to have. I'm like, boy, this is a wild experience.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
And my daughter's younger than your kids, and even now it's just like, without a question, the most pivotal pinnacle experience of my life, bar none. So I couldn't agree with you more. And, it really is, to your point about time and how you spend it. It's like the further down the road I get, the more I realize that time is your most valuable asset, bar none. And so the more complex life gets, the rewards get bigger, but also how you manage and how you spend your time becomes even more valuable. So I totally agree with that. And I think that's like a really good place to kind of wrap things up. However, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, where should they find you on the internet? Because there's lots to see. What do you want to share?
Yeah, I think the most, the hub of everything right now is at wildcombination.com. Wild Combination's my production company, and the website has had a little more attention paid to it than any of the other properties on the market.
Great.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes. I'll dig up your Instagram, throw it in there too.
Boom.
So
Please
people
do.
can get a peek behind the scenes. And I don't doubt that as our friendship and our professional relationship continues, there will be any number of amazing personal and passion projects that roll out to the public, and maybe that line, those parallel lines, creep a little closer.
You need a dance ad, come to Jacob.
He's the man to do it. Well,
yeah.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate you doing this. I'm glad we could find the time.
Yeah, thank you for the chance to actually verbalize some things that have me thinking. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
You have your thinking face on.
Yeah,
I think you're going to hang on to that for a while.
Free therapy. Come to Drew for the free therapy and the cinematography.
Hey, I do very different things, but apparently I do them well.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. That was my conversation with Jacob Krupnick. Like I said in the interview, he's one of the most calculated and considered people I know. So I just got so much out of this conversation. If you're curious, this is just how we talk, whether the cameras and microphones are on or not. Like, this is the level of conversation that we have. I really hope you got something out of it. If you want to see more from him or Wild Combination, just visit wildcombination.com. That's the best place to go. The work is fantastic and speaks for itself. And as before, hit subscribe if you haven't. Leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, drop a like and a subscribe there. It really helps us out. I will see you next time.